Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and once again I'm joined by Jim Simonetti, where we'll be speaking with Frank McAveety. Welcome to the show, Frank.
Good afternoon.
Well, first and foremost, we're in the confines of the Jimmy Johnstone Academy. What's your thoughts?
It's a fantastic facility. You could drive up Cathcart Road here and sweep past it and not really know. In that wee building just behind the trees is a kind of fantastic facility that's, you know, in terms of the experience. We've got a match day experience. You get into a facility like here, the changing rooms, and just obviously the homage to one of the greatest players in European football. There's no doubt about it in terms of Jimmy Johnston's history as a player. So it's a fantastic facility, and I know there's longer term development plans that are in situ right now. So I wish the academy the best, and hopefully that out of that some youngsters could progress into professional football and be a credit to their families and to the community they come from.
Absolutely. You very thoughtfully brought along some props, and I love when people do that because it tells you a wee bit about them. Yeah. You know, we've had people coming along with wee bags of
great
memories. And what I love about this, there's a caricature on the desk here. You're wearing the green and white hoops. Mm-hmm. There's a guitar. Tell us about that and relate it to your love of Celtic and music. I
mean, it came out, I'd been doing an after dinner speaking engagement on behalf of the then First Minister Jack McConnell, and I think the organiser would say, well, how do we show respect to Frank's contribution? So they must have had a wee thought about what is their perspectives about me. So they thought, well, he seems to like himself a lot, self-confident, you know.
Like himself.
I know, and
do you like yourself a lot, Frank? Aye.
Well, I think it's a Glaswegian thing, Jim. You know,
absolutely.
If we didn't assert ourselves, you know, we're confident. I mean, underneath that, there's a kind of uncertainty. There's a classic self-confident Glaswegian that wherever we are, we're going to be the most dominant and the loudest. But actually, like everybody else, we've got our own insecurities.
Good on you. Good on you.
So I didn't know they were doing it, and what happened is I got it sent through to me, and it's obviously a couple of mirrors there, you know. Pretty handsome guy sitting there with his guitar.
Absolutely.
So I think it sums up kind of my obsession with music, which I blame my older brother Jim for, and the fact that, you know, that people knew, I mean, in terms of Glasgow, you know, that you're already defined by your name very often. So my mother and father had christened me Francis McAveety, so I think that gave the game away when it came to what's the likely football team to support. So it's a lovely wee caricature, and obviously I'm looking a lot younger and fresh-faced in it as I look at it from this angle at the moment.
There's also a disco ball. You a bit of a dancer, you a bit of a mover?
No, I would say that clearly was I think that has more to do with just performance.
Right.
I wouldn't have thought that was my kind of heyday up the dancing in Glasgow, which would have been fairly limited.
Isn't it amazing that he's mentioned the word the dancing again? Because we had Stephen in for St Rocks as well, and he started to mention the dancing and shuffles and different places like that.
I find that hilarious because in Fife you don't call it the dancing.
No, but it was brilliant. Were you ever at shuffles or that, Frank? Are you just a wee, maybe, were you a year younger than me?
I was quite shy, and the problem is that Stevie that you're talking to, he was considered a bit of the catch at our primary school.
Aye,
and secondary school, so he's quite a good looking boy, so I don't think he need much trouble. He was up dancing.
He was up against all his, he was, you know what I mean?
Jim, I was more a conversationalist, Jim.
I see.
I was an inner poet, you know. Which when you're 17, lassies aren't interested in that at all.
Well, I've got to be honest, Frank, that back in the days of shuffles, we actually thought we were poets as well. You know what I mean? We actually thought we were poets.
God, you could have a separate programme, couldn't you, on the nightclubs of Glasgow?
Of course you could, aye.
Joanna's, my goodness.
Well, Joanna's was great.
Seen a many a crime, you know.
Aye, but that, do you know what, Paul John?
Is that Joanna D's?
No.
That's that classic at Hag Hill, Duke Street. No, that was a unique cultural experience, that one, you know.
I bet.
Joanna, Joe Deegan, who was in as well, and Graham Diamond. Mm-hmm. Joanna's was a great place during the week, and we served the apprenticeship. We were talking about served the apprenticeship and shuffles up the stairs, then went down the stairs to Boss Skaggs and Stevie Wonder and all the soul music, and then up to Joanna's. Joanna's became something a wee bit special, so that was good as well. So you're Joanna's boy, eh?
I frequented it occasionally.
Aye, good.
I love the name Shuffles. You just get this image in your mind, don't you, Frank? Now, you said you had an obsession with music. Talk to us about your love of music. Jim and I, we love music, and we talk about it all the time in the podcast.
Well, my older brother Jim, he was the first to be working in the house, you know, so we always had good, before we even went into his work, we had good paper runs, so we had a pretty extensive paper run network, so we had a lot of available cash. And our Jim and me shared the room, you know, the story there is we had to share a bed till we were about 13, 14, a double bed. Then my mum and dad won the Celtic pools, funnily enough, a small amount, and we thought it was a fortune, and we could get 2 single beds. But all we had was 2 single beds and wall-to-wall vinyl. And so our Jim and I basically went to gigs, you know, great legendary gigs at the Apollo, buying records, and then, you know, even, I know it's almost, it's nostalgia now, because, you know, a Saturday daytime, if you had a bit of time and there was maybe either you weren't playing for your amateur team, or there was an away game or whatever format, you would run all the record shops, and there was tons of independent small record shops in Glasgow. I mean, I was thinking the other day there how few are left. And so it was basically he influenced me. He had a great taste in music. So we were saying earlier, you know, once you start, you know, with the obvious big bands like the Who and the Beatles and the Stones, then you branch out into, well, the Stones are absolutely rooted in blues, and then you go back to the blues music and go back to that, and the Beatles was rooted in the kind of Everly Brothers and various other stuff for the 50s, and then you know, and then you get, well, where does soul music kick in, and then before you know it, that's a big box to open, and it's just it's a case of, you know, just wall-to-wall vinyl. I mean, and we had to just step over the vinyl to get out to the front, out to the landing, as you called it in Glasgow.
Brilliant.
And it's just,
I love that.
And then, but I mean, thousands of records. I mean, I've got about 5,000-6,000 vinyl albums now, and our Jim has probably got as many. So,
and it's all varied.
I would say so. I mean, there's certain genres, you just have to be very careful about. I mean, I love jazz music, but I know that there's 70, 80 years of magnificent jazz recordings, and a lot of that's now changed because the copyright's gone. So you can pick up a lot of bargains in terms of jazz, but you know that's thousands of hours of listening. We were pretty mainstream initially, and then obviously when I was 15, new wave, punk and new wave kicked in. So you were like throwing aside all the albums that you used to thought were cool, like the Led Zeppes and the Deep Purples, and they were no interested in that. Into the Clash, into the Buzzcocks, into the Talking Heads, into the Ramones, you know,
the Pistols,
television. Well, one album, you know, but what an album, you know.
Great album,
but it was also the kind of dynamic of that. It was really, because there's a period in any musical history where there's just a period where things totally get disrupted, and punk new wave for 2 years was a disruptive before the corporate nature of the music industry controls that. But so there was lots of incredible excitement around at that time, you know.
Paul, I think you'd have loved the Apollo, because you're a fashionable type guy, and you like your music, and you've got that style for that. The music in the last probably 15 years and whatever. But the Apollo was special, Frank, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I was dead lucky, Paul, that I seen the Jackson 5 there, and they were the Jackson 5. I don't know if you were at that gig. I seen Queen there. I seen Dr. Hook. I think I even went to see the Wombos there one night as well. But
you've got great musical taste.
Absolutely, it's very varied, Frank.
If you lived alone for a long time,
absolutely, I'm still living alone. And I stumbled into that concert actually. Dr. Hook I seen there as well. But the most memorable one was probably the Jackson 5 there. Wow. But it was great. And then I seen Sham 69 there as well. Yeah.
But it's a funny thing, because I was talking to my older brother Jim about it the other week there, that we went from kind of the fag end of progressive rock, as they called it, like Camel and Caravan and Sabbath and all that.
That's right.
And then 6 months later, you're at the Buzzcocks, the Jam, the Clash, and all that energy. You know, even having a square go with the legendary Apollo Bouncers.
That's right.
You know, and that was a fearsome, you know, they didn't hold back, but, you know, it's all part of the fun, you know, when you're a young teenager and it's this kind of new musical style that's coming in. So, yeah. That was,
but Glasgow at that time as well, Frank, it was buzzing with music, it was buzzing with the atmosphere, with the dancings and all these bands coming to the world famous Apollo. And we had Jason Lawson in, the Show People.
Yeah.
A wee while ago, and the Greens connected with Greens, and Jimmy McGrory was a part of that family as well, which we found intriguing. So the Apollo has got a big history there,
rich history. What I always think about when you're talking about a love of music, and what I always think about is you've got your own era, you discover music, you then backtrack, like you say, retrospectively. But the great bands always stand the test of time, don't they? And you always go back to them. Do you think we're in an era where the music's become more throwaway? Is there bands coming out now, Frank, that you think 20, 30 years later people will still be listening to them?
I'd like to think so. I mean, there are some fascinating bands still. I mean, there's a band that I'm a big fan of that's kind of particular style of music, a band called Low from Minnesota, and it's really, really slow core atmosphere music, you know, and it's just builds and builds. But for a 3-piece band, what a noise they make. And no, I like to think so. I mean, interestingly, whilst he's had an up and down career since the changeover for the Jam, I mean, I just picked up the recent Paul Weller album, and he's 62, he's a bit like Springsteen, he's mellowed out in many ways, he's reflective about his life, but actually in his most recent albums, you know, I was always a big fan of the Jam, and most of the Style Council, and lost his way in the latter part of that. But there's an artist who I think at least is trying to reinvent himself, you know, so when he plays a live gig, there'll be people jumping up and down at the great tracks like Eating Rifles for his Jam days, but he's still making sure they're having to confront his present product. So I think there's tons of bands out there. I mean, obviously, you know, you remember most fondly when you're a lot younger with all the energy that's associated with you and your pals and, you know, socialising and having a great time. So when people throw that up on Twitter, as Twitter often does, and you go, my God, I remember that. Yeah. That's because it brings such a powerful emotional resonance to you. But I'd like to think that artists are still capable. I think the problem nowadays, or challenge for somebody in my generation, is that there are so many platforms now that a person can make a name for themselves basically on, you know, the format of how they produce the stuff in its own. I mean, I don't even know the terms because I'm getting on a bit, you know, but, you know, how their product sells. Whereas
There's no
before,
filter. There's no filter now, is there?
Yeah, but the benefit, I mean, the upside and downside is when you discovered an artist when I was younger, in a sense, it's part of that possessiveness you have as a teenager, but that's my artist, that's right, I hope nobody knows them. And then when they get big, you go...
You always want to introduce that artist, didn't you?
Whereas now, if I can, you give me any name of any artist anywhere in the globe, and you can key it in, and you'll be able to find that product. Not the way the generation I was brought up in is about owning the album, the vinyl, the cover, the whole ritual. You know, you're trying to explain that to younger people about taking the album out of the sleeve and carefully putting it on the turntable. I mean, that's my memory, so that's what triggers for me. But I'm sure there are plenty of artists in contemporary terms that are relatively new that hopefully are producing stuff that can make a real difference. And you know, there's artists that have never been known well enough who should have been, which is the thing that annoys me about the music industry. There's some great talents that have produced some fantastic songwriting and they're hardly selling a bean, you know.
You're right. We know one of them, Edgar Summertime Jones from Liverpool. 10, 11. He's played with Weller, actually. He played live at the Royal Albert Hall. Yeah. Brilliant. The gig's on YouTube. He's a bass player. Yeah. Very talented, but he's skint. Yeah. You know, and that's just the way of the world, unfortunately. But music and Celtic, I'm not going to say music and football, but music and Celtic work hand in hand, Frank. When you think back to your introduction to Celtic, we often hear stories of, you know, parties with families getting together and an old guitar comes out or the songs come out. Yeah. Is that similar to your own childhood memories? I mean, I've brought up in an ordinary working class family in Springman initially. So it was a big extended family where the washboard was coming out and the banjo would come out. And they obviously you had the kind of, in terms of my age group, you know, the Glenn Daly album would produce, the Celtic album would be brought out. I mean, most of the songs are terrible, if you're honest about it, in terms of quality of music, but
the benefit is that it's a kind of experience that when you say you pick your team now, very often your team is picked for you by the environment that surrounds you, and so if there's an environment of receptivity towards whatever Celtic, and it can mean so many different things to different people. I mean, the thing that offends me most about my own city is how I think you're entitled to have your views, but how bitterly divided we can sometimes be unnecessarily, when actually we should be seeing how football's a healing process, and you must be doing that with the youngsters here, the kids coming from not just the west of Scotland, all these youngsters that are newcomers, the families are newcomers to Glasgow, the using football is the fusion for doing good things, and I think that's what we need to remind ourselves of, because the thing about football in this society, particularly Glasgow, when we're in the shadow of the old Cathkin Park, in terms of the amount of per head of population that likes to still go and see a game. I think Scotland, even now, is still one of the highest in Europe. I mean, our game's not economically in a good shape, because of the economics of Scottish football, and there's lots of other big arguments you can have about that, but football matters, and emotionally it matters about your own self-confidence, and I think if you've been brought up in that tradition, whether you're a Celtic-minded person as I am, or you're part of the other clubs like the Rangers, pals of mine that are big Rangers supporters, it's just about, you care passionately about the club, and you want the very best for it. Obviously our next season is probably the most important in my living memory. And I look with interest to how that can develop, because it will be the most nerve-jangling season every game till the end of the calendar, if we can get to the end of the calendar, which we didn't do last season.
That's another argument. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point, Frank, that we brought up a few times on the podcast, and the first and foremost, the most important thing is getting the fixtures finished.
Absolutely.
We don't even know if that's going to be possible. You've just said some news about youth football today, Jim.
I just come in there when Frank was sitting with us through another room having a wee discussion with the kids' football will be starting back now till mid-October. It's absolutely crazy. I mean, the kids are going back to school in August. They're all going to be mixing together, and some of the constraints that's getting put on now. Listen, everybody must have a reason for this that we don't know of, but not to play until October or maybe after. Beggars belief for me. Absolutely beggars belief. And the interesting thing is, Paul, and as Frank says as well, once we start, will it keep going or will it stop, Frank?
I know.
I think, obviously I'm a politician, but my background, but my worry about the science of this has moved all over the place. Because I remember at the time going, well, why is it okay initially to be in a gym? Why is it okay to be in a sauna? Why is it okay to go swimming? There's no worry. And then suddenly it's the absolute opposite. It seems to be the science now. There's kids are to come back to school, and I'm delighted about that. As a former teacher, getting kids from ordinary working class families back in school again is critically important, because they'll lose every month away. That youngster's getting less of a chance of education, be the root out of inequality or poverty or so on. And my worry is, when I'm saying it's okay for all these youngsters to be in self-contained classrooms for 4 or 5 hours a day, but we can't have kids running about in the open air. And I think, come on, there needs to be a proportionate balance, because in the absence of a vaccine anyway, there needs to be an analysis of proportionate balance. And I sometimes think it's, at this late stage, it's fallen at the wrong end. And I think we've got to have kids active. We've got to make sure that youngsters are, for their mental health and physical development, they need to be allowed the chance to exercise and enjoy themselves. And even the social aspect, because I was thinking about it the other week there, going, how would I have felt at the age of 15, 16, and I couldn't meet my pals for 3-4 months? Mental.
You're right, Frank. And Paul, Frank and I actually went to school together, a famous school called All Saints. And can you picture that now, Frank? I mean, I think we had the biggest school in Europe at that particular time, or so it was said, that we had, 1,800 kids in that school?
Easy.
Am I right?
Yeah.
For all different areas. So you had Blackhill, you had Provanmill, you had Barlornock, Springburn, other surrounding areas.
All the quiet fishing villages.
All the quiet, no, I would like to see affluent areas of the day, you know. I thought it was wonderful.
Oh, there's people with 4 block houses we used to love.
You were lucky. I think we actually had about 120 upper close at one time or whatever. But anyway, but if you look at going back to our school days, Frank, and we were proud to wear the purple with the school, and I didn't know that the reason for that until you told me earlier. But the reason I'm going back to that. So imagine that was back in that day. If we'd have caught that epidemic, or it was then, it'd have been absolutely catastrophic to the communities. But I think it's catastrophic today that in a different way that these kids have got to mix with each other, and they've got to be educated with each other and being together, and to try and still put sports off that helps them and whatever. I'm sorry, I know I've come round the circle here, Paul, but I don't get it.
Mm-hmm. And that's the difficulty we're going to face in Scottish football as a whole, I think, Frank, and it may be the only thing that stops Celtic from winning the 10. Mm-hmm. So here's hoping we can get the season finished, and we'll take a wee step back. And you mentioned there that you're a politician, and you know, your environment and your upbringing often forms your political mindset. I mean, personally, my dad was a striking miner, so there's no other political mindset that I could possibly be than left wing. Labour for many, many years, but obviously in time that's maybe changed up to this present day. Talk to me about how your own political mindset was formed.
Well, I mean the wider immediate family in terms of aunties and uncles, there was a very strong, you know, value system, you know, so the idea of if you're working, you're in a trade union, you know, the trade unions are there to look after working people. That if you, in terms of their faith background, the idea is if you've got a committed religious faith, you put something back into the community. You never turn your back on those that are, you know, been unfortunate or unlucky in life, because that could be any one of us. I mean, the amount of times that relatives would say that to me, that could be for the grace of God, that could be you know, so never ever forget that. So that kind of shape, and obviously that you know, obviously politics have become a bit more turbulent from my point of view, obviously as a long-standing Labour politician, and the present challenge for Labour in Scotland to me is still a powerful one that we need to try and resolve, because I do think Scotland has prospered historically from positive Labour values, and I remember my father saying to me, you know, without a Labour government giving the chance for getting a decent council house, or getting you to go to a good local primary and secondary school. I mean, these are all things that were fought for, that were they're never given to you. You have to fight in every time, and obviously the experience in the 80s, when I was a young activist, the miners' strike is one of the defining experiences for those of us that were brought up as teenagers in my early 20s and in the 80s under the kind of changes to the communities. Now, those changes may well have been occurring because of the wider economy. Yeah. The greatest tragedy was there was never a transition. So these communities were left, you know, so if you look at the history of the former mining communities, the economic hit that those communities have taken in terms of what's the level of employment now, what's the nature of those communities. I mean, very often they look like suburban new housing. Yeah. So what was this political strategy other than the obvious one from the Conservative government and the National Coal Board? So they shaped me, you know, and obviously I had, you know, uncles and that. I mean, they may never have been through into university, but these people were as good as anybody you could meet at a university, and I'm talking to yourself, and you know the mining communities, you know the value that education was placed by all the miners, that they wanted for their sons and daughters a better opportunity that didn't mean they were going down underneath the ground, and so they believed in education, they believed in, even in terms of cultural stuff, the brass bands, the musical performance, the fact that Fife Council, for example, had one of the best investment in music education anywhere in the UK, you know, but that's because a lot of these men and women that were brought up in these kind of socialist environments or trade union environments or labour environments, whatever nuance you want to be. I mean, I'm not a sect type person, so I always notice that people on the left always want to define you and split and then say you're not quite as pure as me. That drives me nuts. I think it's about practically what difference you're trying to make. When you're in public office, and I've often had these disagreements and in discussions, I say, how are you nudging things forward for people in through our backgrounds to get the best chance they've got. And I know that when I put my head down in the pillow at night, I mean, I'll get pelters for things because politically you're in front of the public eye, but I'd like to think there's things that have happened in Glasgow that I was involved in assisting. So one of the things I'm most proud of is when I was sports minister, helping to create the space for the national sports arena to be located in Glasgow. Because the debate at the time was maybe it should be going to Stirling because of the University of Sport. And I said, but Bridge of Allen is not the neediest community in Scotland. And there are parts of Scotland that could benefit from, even just, I'm not saying you necessarily get full economic benefits, as a symbol of belief in an area by putting something somewhere.
Yeah.
You're saying you matter, you know, and so the Emirates Arena in the East End of Glasgow, which is foreshadowed by the very small stadium across the road. You know, the truth of the matter is that was a run-down tenement housing area when I was
that's right.
a youngster. It was basically where you parked your cars if you had a chance to go to Celtic Park, and now it's now hosting the biggest sports event. So you try and make those wee nudges politically, and you know, and I know that whatever direction Scotland's taking place on, I've got a strong sense of where I think Labour has to go. I'm not a fan of nationalism because I think it can bring out some ugly emotions in people, but I mean, I understand that, you know, that's a debate we're all having amongst ourselves, and whatever happens in Scotland, I want Scotland to do well. But the idea that, you know, you don't care about your country because you happen to have a particular political affiliation was maybe one of the less attractive aspects of the post-2014 country, and maybe the choices that people have to make. Now, I still think 6 years on we're still unravelling that debate of 6 years ago, and what worries me is the kind of things that, I'm not taking long on this, but I think it's important to say this.
No, absolutely. No, carry on.
The issue is that what I was brought up to believe was, you know, get somebody a decent house, get somebody into employment, make sure that's proper, paid, well-paid employment and protected employment. Make sure that as you get older, there's going to be public services at your time of need in terms of a decent health service or a decent care service. And those are the things that when I wake up every day, I was trying my best. I wasn't always getting it right. I mean, we had one or two difficult issues in the city over the years. But at the end of the day, what compelled me was that rather than identity. You shouldn't. I mean, I'm Scottish as anybody. I'm as patriotic as anybody, but it doesn't define what my politics are. My politics are basically based on a kind of class consciousness. And I'm probably a pretty moderate Labour member now. When I was younger, I was wanting to smash the system and overwhelm everybody. But I realised you're either inside trying to sort it or you're outside shouting about it. I'd rather be inside trying to sort it.
And did you think that you had to fight hard, Frank, for the Emirates to be the sports centre? And obviously, you spoke there very passionately about the miners, which was very close to our hearts. My grandfather was a miner as well, and so we'll look at that and we come forward to today's youth with the history of the Labour Party and people like yourself. Why do you think there is a wee decline, maybe in the Labour vote today? Why or how do we educate the young people to go back to vote for Labour, which was our forefathers? Well, certainly mine. I'm speaking as an individual here, and Paul, Labour. How do we get these young ones now back thinking along the Labour lines?
Well, I mean, there's no God-given right for any political party to have a sense of ownership. But voters could determine where they want to go. So the lesson we need to do, first lesson we need to understand is you have to earn the right to be heard, and then demonstrate, if you're being heard, that you've got the capability to serve, right? And now, I think Labour's exceptional strength historically has been, it was a moral mission. I mean, I was brought up with a sense of you're trying to give people who've got nothing the best chance to maximise what they can do, right? So it's a moral mission. We need to try and find a way of getting that back as part of our agenda. But also, it was also about aspiration, right? It was about the idea that you can get an opportunity to become, you know, a skilled tradesman, a young professional, an opportunity for you to, you know, make your way in life, as long as you don't forget on your way through that journey where you've come from, and that you always think about putting something back. So those are the big challenges. Obviously, Labour's not an identity type party. It's not about flags, somebody would try and claim it would be solely about the red flag, but even that was a minority of Labour support. It was about the idea that you could make a change, and therefore whatever happens in Scotland, I don't know. I don't see another referendum in the short to medium term. I think there'll be a lot of brouhaha about it, but I don't see it. In all those years worrying about that, when you could be worrying about fundamentals, worries me. And I just think that's the real challenge. And then the final thing is that you've got to demonstrate that whatever people think about their country now, does what Labour offer resonate with them? And that's the hard challenge for us, for myself as a Labour politician, is are we speaking in a language that people want to hear at the moment? And I don't have any simple answer. If I knew the simple answer, I'd set myself up as a commercial entity and provide my years of experience and balance on it. I just know emotionally that the greatest thing that has ever been produced in this country was driven by Naib Evan, right? And in terms of the health service, and I think that what the present COVID crisis has demonstrated how utterly powerful and important that is for our sense of well-being, and that, we created something magnificent, and therefore we need to try and find another set of ideas that inspire people again to say, you know what, I might have left you, but I still want to give a chance to get you heard again. And it's up to us to earn that, so we need a generation. I mean, I'm stepping down as the leader of the Labour group after serving the second time round for 5 years, is to provide the opportunity for other folk to say, well, what can you do? Because I've had a really good shift, I've done lots of good things, still got a lot to offer, but I think it's time for somebody else to emerge.
Of course, everybody's always got things to offer.
Yeah.
Now, when you were next door, you seen the Wall of Honour in there, Paul, that we proudly present to everybody. You'll see there, Gordon Brown's on there, Tony Blair's on there. Jimmy had a great a love, great affection for Labour, all through his life.
Aye.
It's great to have these testaments to a great footballer, from Prime Ministers, from Her Majesty the Queen, from His Holiness the Pope, Arsenal, Manchester United. It's endless in there. And you got a great sportsman like Jimmy, and a great advocate of the Labour Party. And you look at the leaders that maybe we should have or you should have in the Labour Party. What type of leader do you think the Labour Party should have?
Well, I mean, we're that good at it in Scotland that we keep replacing the leaders, So since we lost power in 2007, I think we've been at 7, probably got nearly a full foot beside of people that have been Labour leaders. I mean, I think they should be values driven. I think they should be caring about the idea of what's in both the interests of ordinary people. They should have an awareness of where Scotland can go and can achieve, and therefore speak that language about understanding Scotland. And there's a whole generation of younger people, much younger than me, that the kind of the I call the social structures that made it automatic for someone like me to consider that if I was involved interest in politics, that was the natural home for me. That's fractured, and I think Labour has a massive job to pull that back and be relevant to anybody under the age of 40. And then thirdly, I think the challenge is, it's that difficult mix for a party like Labour of, its radical history, but also its pragmatism.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the great myths of modern Scottish politics is that Nicola Sturgeon and the SNP are naturally left-wing. Well, actually, they're naturally social democratic. In the sense that they govern from the middle, right? Because they've worked that out, because that's where Labour won under the 97 elections onwards, because it was appealing, not necessarily the ideologically committed, it was appealing to people in the middle to make them, to give them, I thought, I can give them a benefit of the doubt. And that's a massive challenge. And I mean, historically, I think, I'm pleased at the change at the UK level. I think that Keir Starmer brings a level of credibility and experience from his previous job. I think he's been wiping the floor with the absolute buffoon that's our Prime Minister in the UK. But we've left him with a legacy of a massive majority because of our failure. as a political party. And I know there's a massive challenge in Scotland of people who will always thinking through it, we say, well, you know what, I don't want anything to do with this at all. I would take the risk or uncertainty of separating from the rest of the UK. Now, I'm in the middle there where I said that, you know, if that's a choice people in Scotland make, well, you need to face up to that. But is it the right thing to do? Is the debate I have with my pals. And, you know, typical Glasgow pals, you know, you'll be fighting till all hours in the morning, you know. And then your family, you'll have
politics,
barnleys with your brothers all the time about it, you know, but that's because you care. And it's, you know, and I'm, you know, I'd like to think that whatever contribution I've tried to make, you know, people can have their pop at me. I'd like to think that in any time they've engaged with me, they go, well, at least Frank knows what he's talking about and he's got a strong sense of what his values are. And, you know, I might give him the benefit of the doubt, you know. But I've done my shift at council level. I mean, I've been a council leader twice and I've, you know, great opportunities in terms of things to achieve from that, and I had the chance to serve in the Scottish Parliament. I still have I would say to my colleagues, I still got something to offer to the wider regeneration of Labour, because I'm no DJ. And when I did announce my stepping down, it felt like you were at your own funeral as people who've never given you praise in their life or suddenly talking about how great a guy you were.
But that's politics. You're right. But you've got to get, Paul. You've got to get the praise. You get the knocks. You get so maybe it balances itself out. But you're a councillor at the moment.
Yeah.
Would you go back to Holyrood?
Well, I've done. I mean, it's a bit like football players, isn't it? You know, would you go back to the club you've done some of your best?
That's a good point.
For? I mean, ultimately, Labour has to sort itself out. As a party, we have to sort ourselves out as how credible we are with the voters.
Yeah.
So that voters could say, you know, I'd like some capable folk for Labour in the Parliament. But, you know, I mean, look at the turmoils that's presently occupying elements of the Yes movement, where there's a variety of new options being thrown up there. So that will that benefit the Yes movement? Well, some people around the former First Minister think it might, you know, but I still think there's a need for a Labour voice in the Scottish Parliament, and I would serve at any level if the party wanted me to, but ultimately that's a matter for the voters to decide. But when looking back, I mean, the period when you make that announcement I made the other week there, you do reflect on, well, what kind of contributions you've made, and without being too self-confident about it, I'd like to think, well, when the balance sheet is written, what did you try and do? That was one of the things my aunties and uncles always said to me, what difference did you try and make? And I'd like to think I tried to make some difference. I didn't always get it right, and I've had disagreements with people about some issues, and they were painful issues. You know, the difficult issue in Glasgow was the final stages of the very difficult issue around equal pay and the impact on the women workforce. I mean, I inherited that. I wasn't involved in the decision making of that when those decisions were made.
But you inherited it?
I inherited it. It's a bit like, I take a very simple view, is that if you're asked to be at the top of the tree, sometimes you need to own the difficult as well as the good.
Yeah. And
don't, you know, and some people think it's all right just to dismiss the previous grouping as well. They knew nothing about this or that. And in football, that's also a bad policy. You can't have a new manager coming in going, everything you ever did before. Look, I mean, you only need to look at the history of when Clough came in to Don Ravy and that fantastic footage, not just in the film, that's fictional, but and in the book, but the actual real life interviews where Don Ravy and the rest of the team were going, don't throw your medals in the bin because you didn't earn them fairly. You shouldn't operate like that. But that was a difficult one because my mother was a cleaner.
So was Mama.
So I'm always conscious that they're at the bottom. As I always say when I was teaching to kids that used to drop litter on the floor and they would be dismissive of it. So that's for the cleaning woman to pick up. I said, would you pick it up for £2 an hour? You know, whatever the wages were in the days. Now it used to drive me nuts, you know. And it's all, look, you have these things, but at the end of the day, I was shaped with such a strong sense of values that, and I think those values on balance were good for Scotland. And I sometimes look back in recent years and go, how easily that's been dismissed, as if they've never made a contribution. And I think that worries me in the long run.
You made a really interesting comment about when you stood down and it was, you said you're still alive.
Yeah.
And it made me remember Paul McCartney's immortal quote, rumours of my death have been greatly exaggerated. Going back to the musical references again.
I like that, Paul. That's a great saying, that.
That's true. What I'm thinking, sitting here, fairly politicised at a young age due to my father's situation and free school dinners and no wages and hand-me-downs and all that kind of stuff. I'm now looking at the buffoonery of the current leader, as you quite rightly called him, a buffoon. And I'm looking at the aftermath of Brexit and the aftermath of the pandemic response.
Yeah.
And you're going to have a great amount of people looking at that, I think, Frank, and saying, well, we're being led by buffoons. Why can't we lead ourselves? And I think that will lend and feed in to the Yes movement. Do you think that would make a big difference? Should there ever be a second referendum on independence?
I mean, if you were going to pick a caricature of a kind of Tory Prime Minister that hasn't got a resonance to ordinary people, you couldn't get a better example. I do worry that such a seismic decision of both the economic and social risks of a decision to leave the United Kingdom isn't fully thought through, because the benefit is, at the moment, if it's based on whether you like the present incumbent or not, so all about positive people, I know people have got sometimes fixed views on these matters, and they are very passionate, I mean, close friends of mine that can be very committed in terms of the position they have on independence, but say Labour had done better, and there's different arguments about who does that, but say Labour had done better and we had a PM that was the quality of someone like Keir Starmer, my view would be that his handling would be so much better that we wouldn't necessarily having that so polarised in terms of that. The second thing is that the parliamentary inquiry in Scotland will be interesting, because if people haven't heard it yet, the broadcast yesterday evening from the words of those who worked in care homes, there come powerful testimonies in there about our handling. So, because by and large, most of the strategies that were adopted in the UK were also adopted in Scotland. There was a very clear, I can see in all the home nations, whether it's Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland or England, that the health departments had a very particular view of how to handle this issue, and it's turned out to be fatal. And so I think politics can shift in respect to that. I mean, the fundamentals for the referendum, if it ever comes again, will still be economics, and the question for those who would wish Scotland to separate is to demonstrate that the economic consequence of that isn't as challenging as, well, the position they had in 2014 is now a totally different position they now have for 2020. So they need to explain how come that was the only model in 2014 and what is really different in 2020. But that's a matter for whenever the debate takes place. But for a vast majority of folk in the middle in Scotland, that was the fundamental. Because people had picked a side, a bit like a football team, and it felt like that at times during the referendum. That's your football team, and I'm going to shout at you forever, and obviously, Labour was targeted by a lot of folk in terms of some of the epithets that you got. And we need to work our way through that, but at the end of the day, it's still going to be that mainstream middle that's going to determine whether or not Scotland takes such a big decision. As you can tell from my contribution, I'm a sceptic, primarily on the economics. I thought some of the stuff that came out, people talk about a joyous civic experience. I didn't feel like that at the time, because I was on the side that was trying to say, I think we should still stick within the United Kingdom and try and rebalance the United Kingdom and so on, which is a lot harder to argue for, because there's so many nuances to that than the very simple proposition is, look, we can just run it ourselves without anybody really questioning how do you put that together. And that's, I think, the more sensible folk in the Yes. And I've talked about mainstream because there are always going to be folk on the edges of every political campaign. The challenge for the Yes movement is how do they get the sensible voices to be able to be persuasive, because the idea that you shout at somebody because they've been a no voter strikes me as self-defeating. So if I was giving advice to the Yes movement, I go, find your best voices that demonstrate you're asking people to cross that bridge with you in a collaborative way. And for those of us who wanted United Kingdom and Scotland to stay in the United Kingdom, we need to have a more persuasive, emotional argument about why it's still worth keeping together. It's not just a crude economics of, your mortgage and your pension. It needs to be a more profound debate about, who you are, identity, and what is the lessons around Europe. Because, I'm looking at the Germans and I'm looking at the Canadians, the whole federal systems there, although they've been shaped for a long time, they've helped those countries to get to reflect the nuances of what it is to be Scottish, Welsh, Northern Irish, English, or the English regions. Because, I mean, if there's any bit of the UK that's been really badly hit over the last 30, 40 years with the economics of the globe, it's been the northeast of England.
Yeah.
And yet, how do folk from there get a chance to have their viewpoints reflected? Whereas with the benefit we've had, partly because Labour committed to creating the Scottish Parliament when we got elected in 1997, is we've got a lot of powers in Scotland. 35 billion expenditure per year. You can do a lot with that, and take ownership of that and demonstrate that. So, we live in interesting times, to say the least. I just would like it to be about fundamentals, about life, about education, housing, jobs, and looking after older folk. Because I think the COVID has been the most emotionally challenging thing we've ever seen, and what's happened with the old folks' homes in particular.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
Frank. Now, when you're looking at your love of music,
Yeah.
there are figures who you've named as being aspirational, and in politics, who would they figures be?
Well, in terms of my generation, when you're reading, obviously the kind of the great icons like the books that Michael Foot had written about Nye Bevan, obviously coming from the East End of Glasgow in terms of Springburn into the East End representing it. Iconic figures such as Jimmy Maxton for the Bridgeton area and John Wheatley for the kind of Shettleston area. So these were all great folk who were merging very often difficult communities, because not all the communities were in agreement with each other in terms of history, identity and backgrounds. So they were clearly inspirational. I had the privilege of working with Donald Dewar in the first Scottish Parliament, and although Donald was a product of kind of Glasgow Academy and very West End in terms of his sensibility, and probably thought somebody like me was a bit rough, I remember coming back in a car with him. I jumped in his car and said, "Let chance to get back to Glasgow in the car." He said, "Oh, absolutely." And he says to me, what are your interests? I said, "Well, I'm into music, going to gigs, and I like to play football still and all that." But I said, "What's yours, Don?" He goes, "Antiquarian books." And there was a pause and a silence. I said, "Well, that's us." Well, I didn't quite say it.
That's us
as eloquent. What my eloquent phrase was, "That's us gob for a conversation for the next 40 minutes." I said it a bit more prosaically than that.
But Frank, I thought us guys for All Saints read these kind of
I thought
books.
we were poets as well.
We were poets back in the day, and we read the
Jim,
books.
the point is, we shared the same book.
That's right, 1800 years.
Exactly, for the library.
Absolutely, brilliant.
So, in terms of, Donald was an inspirational figure, and obviously through different things in politics, there's been lots of different characters that help influence how you do things. Like, whilst him and I, sometimes it's passed away now, but Pat Lally, for example, was a significant figure in Glasgow politics. But Pat knew how to operate in between the lines. And just watching how he did it, you thought, that's clever. He was a guy who decided that working in the city politics was his preference. He probably could have got a chance in the days when there was a guaranteed opportunity for a Labour politician to be elected in the city to the House of Commons. He chose consciously not to do it because he worked out you get more influence running a city. And he's right. I've had some great opportunities in politics, but the most exhilarating and the most exciting and the most meaningful have been running Glasgow. Mm-hmm. And because you're a Glaswegian, you care about your city and you want the best for it. But it's also that, you can get things done. Even when budgets are horrific, and there's never really been a golden age for local government when it comes to funding, and things have been tough for Glasgow in recent years, but you can still get things done.
Yeah.
Which is better than sitting as an opposition backbencher, literally howling at the moon sometimes. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you've spoken throughout our discussion about family and your upbringing, and your brother was at St Mirren.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Under Alex Ferguson.
Okay.
What is it about great Scottish leaders? When Ferguson is a long line, he's part of a long line of great Scottish leaders, not just football managers, Frank.
Yeah.
But he had something about him. Is it a working class ethic of him, Sir Matt, Busby, Jock Stein, Shankly?
I think the collective communities that came from shaped them, but they're also driven to go for the very best. One of Philip, my older brother Philip, was a good left back, centre half at schools football level and so on, and he was Scottish under 15 schools captain and all that. One of the stories goes, automatically I thought, given the family, he was going to kind of played for a period with the boys club, and then obviously all the stuff in the boys club created a bit more difficulty, which has haunted it ever since, sadly. But one of the kind of stories it's told, where Ferguson's clever, and even in his recent documentary, it came out, a documentary when he was doing his stuff, is how he works out the fathers and the mothers. So you look at Beckham, how he handled Beckham as a teenager, how he handled Ronaldo. He appealed to the fathers on the basis of the fathers would say, I've got a boy that's a football player, and all that kind of pride and all that kind of stuff. But to the mothers, he presented, I can look after your son. Because the mammies would worry about their sons going away for the house. So if you look at the Ronaldo experience or the Beckham, now, obviously our fault it wasn't quite at that level, if I'm honest, right? But he made my mother feel good, because one of the things he does, he clocked along his main scout that my mother never really had been, and he got a massive turkey for Christmas. And he bought her the turkey. So my mother thought, what a lovely man. Yeah. And then he treated my dad like a king by taking my dad down to the Scotland Wales, from memory, I may be wrong on this, but I think he took my dad down to Wales, to Cardiff, to watch your Philip, and he treated my dad like a king. And my dad was, although he was a big Celtic man himself, was like, that's a lovely man. And anybody that's played under him knows that he created that. Any books you read about Ferguson, because he's a fascinating character. I'm sure he's got a dark side, but he just had that capacity to really drive things forward and be very human. I mean, one of the great skills that Steen had, Busby had, Shankly had, and Ferguson's had, is they remembered everybody's names.
Yes.
And they made everybody that came into their orbit feel worthwhile.
Do you know, Paul, Frank has a nail on the head there, and it is amazing how they remember people's names. I mean, it might be an East Stirling player, no disrespect to any of these teams I'm going to mention. It might be an East Stirling player, a Stirling Albion, a Dumbarton player, or, I remember this game against this guy. And Bertie Hall's the exact same. Mm-hmm. They remember. Like, you wouldn't believe, and you go, really? How did they actually do that?
Yeah.
It's a knack. But Sir Alex has got that special a knack with the parents as well. And obviously, coming from Govan, he went through his hardships and whatever, and grown up. But it's amazing that they remember these names. And
but he does simple things, Jim. Like, I was a guest when I was doing the sports minister's job. I was invited to Rangers Man United. I think it was a game that Neville scored after 3 or 4 minutes. So I'm in the director's box, but on the way into the stadium, not the most recent controversial one.
No, I was going to ask you about that. Do you take that tongue in cheek or not?
Well, I can get tons of invitations to watch the Celtic, and nobody chips a light about it, and I turned up out of courtesy, and everyone knows what my football team was, but I'm representing the city of Glasgow, so I've got to, in a sense, represent the city as best as possible. But anyway, that's fine, maybe for another day, unless I've been mischievous. But the truth of the matter is that I was walking into the Rangers stadium in the bottom of the stairs, and Ferguson was halfway up the stairs, and I mean, I was only Phil's younger brother, and I'd met him a couple of times through Labour politics and events that Sir Alex was at. How you knew my name, invites me up, takes me into the blue room, right, makes me feel really important, and he's taking ownership of this. This is before a big European match, where he should be focusing on, maybe he knew what he was doing anyway, right, because he was such a gifted manager, but that kind of interpersonal skills, that's gold dust. And in football, it makes a player do more for you, I would argue, but also makes the family, as in the parents, proud of they've got this person looking after their son. And then, so after the game, that boy would come back home, 18, and go, Mr. Ferguson's really nice to us. And then you'd add, just wonderful interpersonal skills, and also because he came from a very ordinary background, I'm sure he recognised that he's just to be nice, give everybody an opportunity. And I just remember that, because I remember I was in the blue room, and there's a big pal of mine who's a big Rangers supporter, and runs his own business in East End, and he's going, who let you in the blue room? And just at that moment, the directors of Rangers came and said, would you like to come to the director's box? Right? So I'm in the director's box. Man, you have scored. Obviously, you're sitting, understandably.
Were you cheering Frank when Man United?
You've got to be a neutral in these moments, I would argue, just for safety. Now, to be fair, you were treated well enough. Everybody was kind. And even the game that the SNP council leader thought was worth putting on the post-its. Truth of the matter is, Rangers won 5-2 that day against Hibs. So all the other councillors that were round about me that were all Rangers supporters, they were up.
They never got mentioned.
Seats, you know. I'm just sitting there politely going, "Is there a goal being scored?" You know. But that's just, I mean, it's the job you're in. You've got to carry out your duties, and you know the purpose was to talk to the Rangers about, because they're a major institution in the city, irrespective of my football affiliation. How did they develop their stadium? The same way that in recent years Celtic have pulled their act together a lot better about the developments at Celtic Park, the match day visuals, the use of the walkway and so on. They're all good things, and I think ultimately, after years of being under really bad ownership and whatever the ins and outs of all that, you know, I think the present incumbents, I think, are trying their best to pull that club into kind of its contribution to Glasgow, because, you know, Celtic and Rangers were inextricably linked because of the size and scale of the football team, so we need to deal with that, you know. So I occasionally pop up on Twitter with a happy face, you know.
Aye.
And I've been to tons of football games. I mean, I've been a guest of Thistle, Queen's Park, the rugby people, blah, blah, you know, and Celtic in particular had been very kind, inviting you at different things, you know. You do that because of the job. They're obviously, you know, wanting to talk to you about ideas about parking and ideas about the development of the club. And in my view, I took a very simple view as council leader, is that whatever benefits the city has to be my main objective, and having self-sufficient football teams with, you know, thousands of people want to go to watch the games. Let's try and develop that, because Scottish football is in such a perilous, I mean, you don't have the financial model that television brings to English Premier and Championship sides, and we're never going to get that amount of money. So therefore we need to self-generate in our own economic circle, and it's important that Glasgow has strong, successful football teams, and include Thistle in that. It's a terrible tragedy that Thistle are in the lower reaches now of Scottish football, because it should never have been happening.
You know, when you talk about, obviously, Celtic fans and Celtic as a club don't like that association with Rangers. The old forum terminology's out the window. But when you look at the city of Glasgow and in the position that you were in, you had two absolutely huge institutions in the city, bringing huge amounts of revenue into the city when they played big games, which, you know, let's be honest, was every week. So 60,000 at Celtic Park one week, 50,000 at Ibrox the next, then the big European night. So it's bringing all this huge amount of cash into the city, and obviously you recognise that on both sides. Now, you mentioned an issue there with the parking. So you're trying to work with the clubs with the parking restrictions, which is a big issue for both clubs as we stand and as we view it. What are your views on that in relation to, let's say, a 1 mile radius around Celtic Park where there's parking restrictions for the influx of guys like me who drive to the games?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because obviously residents have always had the experience of thousands of folk coming in on match days, and therefore some of the behaviour and conduct of people have been tanked up coming through in their own cars, and somebody's, you know, drinking before the match and so on. And that's been a difficult. So anybody that's represented those parts of Glasgow, whether it's the south side, outside Rangers Stadium, or Celtic Park in the East End, those are pressures that you're under. I mean, ultimately in the long run, it's about sorting out the public transport more effectively to get people in and out without the kind of over-dependence on the car use, because a lot of folk have travelled in, and you only need to see I represent the ward further on from Celtic Park. I'm the Shelton ward. So basically, you can now see the encroachment into Toll Cross.
Right.
And right along London Road, right past the cemetery, right out to the M74. So there's lots of pressure. Consultation has to be the watchword for the council. I know they had some incredible amounts of responses from both Ibrox Park and Celtic Park, and it's not an easy answer. I sometimes think match day management in terms of policing as well could be part of the solution, because I sometimes think you used to be able to nip in and out at Celtic Park. Now there's a lot more delays, and I don't know whether that's operational decisions made at the top end. Again, I'm not close enough to it anymore. So it's a massive challenge, because as both clubs you know, further develop, you know, and obviously Celtic have been the dominant club in Scottish football in recent years, and therefore the opportunities for further development is something that Celtic are looking at. And after, as I say, the years of, you know, disarray in ownership at Rangers, I think there's at least a credible business model that they're trying to to develop in terms of the next stage, because I mean, if that part of Glasgow is crying out for wider redevelopment as well. And the benefit Celtic had, although it was always a contentious issue, judging from the amount of freedom of information requests, the development of the Emirates, part of my argument also was that would help with a wider sporting offer. You just say, look, here we have a major football club and a major sports arena, cheek by jowl, and I mean, I'll kid you on, I mean, the initial response from Peter Lawwell and others was, it's never going to happen. And I said to him, it will happen because it's the best thing that should happen to that site. So we've achieved that, but ultimately the massive challenge in this city, we're a polarised city and people are judging what you do, and they always think there's hidden agendas. I'd like to think when I'm putting my head down in the pill at night, I've been fair to any of the clubs when Thistle were when I was a council leader the first time, Thistle had their first big challenge in terms of the economics of the club. I sat with I think Brian McMaster, I think he's passed away now, he was the director, the chairman at the time, and we worked out a solution from the council's point of view in terms of rates and so on to allow Thistle the period, because my guiding principle is always, as I said earlier, Glasgow's a football city and we love our football, and absolutely, we cannot afford to lose that. We're in the grounds of a relatively famous football club at one time, right? That's happened and that's in the past, but at the end of the day, when Clyde left the city, Thistle were under peril, Rangers have had difficulty, Celtic before the McCann year and onwards for that was in serious. So we're talking about, this is a fragile structure, never mind what's happened in the past 9 months, 4 months with COVID, but the business model for football is precarious, and so we need to work really hard to make sure our clubs can survive this and maximise their opportunity, and if in the long run they help with the wider regeneration, because you would take the same attitude in terms of any big business. There was an area you go, well, I don't want you to leave, so therefore how do we work with you to at least have a legacy? And football matters that much in this city, because sometimes it's the only oil that keeps you going during the week to have a conversation with people.
It matters for many things, Frank. It matters for, you look at Celtic, they generate the income coming to the city, they generate culture in the city, they generate so much, just allowing for your constituency actually, that they generate a massive income, and they must be one of the biggest employers in that end of the city. You'd be able to tell me better than that. But you look at it and you say, parking, obviously we've got people that come for or other place to come to see Celtic as far afield, and the drive there and whatever. So hopefully that the parking issue will get sorted the right way, Paul, on the question you were asking. But I think you look at the football today. You look at the football today. It's a modern game, and if we look at the way some of the stadiums are built in Europe and where they're situated, a lot of them have easily flown cars to get in and to get out of the city. And I'm quite sure with the people in Glasgow and the wealth of knowledge they've got for road systems or whatever, we'll be able, and parking systems, we should be able to sort that from within,
I'd like to think so. I mean, what I like about Glasgow in terms of the football stadiums, that they are still located in the communities that created them. Whenever you visit Newcastle, there's nothing more exhilarating than being in the middle of the city centre, and then suddenly you turn the corner and there's the stadium.
Yeah, that's right.
And the kind of suburbanisation of football stadiums, on a philosophical level, I find kind of dispiriting. Whereas the benefit of Celtic and Rangers still being rooted in the communities that they were developed from is important. I mean, as a personal opinion, I've always been disappointed that the two football academies aren't in the city. So I think Rangers and Celtic could easily have accommodated their football academies and training centres.
I would agree with you on that, actually, Frank.
I know there's a debate about getting away from the stadium and creating a bit of private. I understand that, but there was opportunity for Celtic to have developed the Barrowfield complex. And I was involved in early discussions to help on that. And obviously I've been in different times, to try to assist when Rangers were looking at the site across the road for themselves and so on. But they've now got, Celtic are in Lennoxtown and Rangers in Milngavie for their training. And they're fantastic facilities, and they're top-notch facilities. I was always taking the view, wouldn't that be great if they were in the city, and then particularly during the off-season, they were opened up for the youngsters to get access to good coaches, because obviously both clubs have had very good development staff over the years and feeding in. I know yourselves are at a different level to all that, but and you know what I'm talking about in terms of you want youngsters to come in and get an experience to go, this is a professional setup, and if you're any good, we'll give you the best starts that you can have to try and maximise your ability.
Absolutely, and it's a bit like in the facility you're sitting in here, and obviously when we came here 10 years ago, it wasn't like this, Frank, but we felt it was an era of a magician when he played and his teammates played.
Yeah.
And we look here and say that this is based in, ironically, in Ward 7 of Glasgow.
Yeah.
We've got a facility here we're going through at the moment an asset transfer where we can develop this part of the park. We've got the grass out there, we've got the changing facilities in here, and we've actually had over 60,000 kids play here.
It's remarkable, yeah.
It is remarkable. The moral in my story is that, in what I'm saying, if Celtic and Rangers and other clubs, but basically the two, because of the Lennoxtown situation and the Murray Park, or whatever it's called these days, up by, you're right, Frank, if that was in the city, think you the more they would get through.
Yeah.
They would get more and more people through, getting it out to the community, bringing the community back in the fold there you are, and it gives them a chance to identify any maybe wee nugget that's in there as well.
Yeah,
I would agree with you on that. I'd like to see that, and I would like to have seen it in the city.
But essentially, the business model of football clubs, I mean, obviously Celtic fans have a sense of our history about what shaped the club in terms of the charitable foundations and so on. But that is in direct clash, understandably, with the modern development of football clubs. And therefore, it's about how do we try and manage that, in the sense that, I mean, my original idea way back in the early 2000s was if we can get the Emirates Arena developed for national sports, if Celtic were prepared to take the option up for Barrowfield, and then there's obviously the Celtic Park, you'd have a kind of sporting hub, and that could easily be replicated. But I mean, Scotland. I mean, other bits of Scotland couldn't even put together their own sort of sports models. So you couldn't get the two clubs in Dundee to agree with the university for a new site in Dundee. And whilst I'm not going to dwell on how emotional people feel about stadiums, because I mean the Hibernian fans understandably reacted very strongly to the essential takeover. There was the model that was there for Hearts at the time. But if you're looking at how to develop that, because I mean the street football that created people like Willie Henderson and Jimmy Johnson, that's not there anymore.
No, it's gone. Right?
So it's about a professional development model in terms of a small P, not a capital P, where you've got quality coaching staff. When I was a sports minister, I often stressed to all the folk, it's the quality of the coaching that matters. I mean, you can have as much enthusiasm in the world, but you've got to have people who know
it's a quality
where the talent is and how to develop that young person, not just football wise, but you deal with these young people. The emotional intelligence you need at the most fragile time of your life when you're an adolescent.
Yeah,
with everything else could be happening in your wider family. Never mind, I mean, because kids nowadays with different types of pressures from what I had. At least I had a loving family round about me, turbulent as it can sometimes be, but that's your Glasgow family for you, right? But, there's kids with other pressures, and I mean, God forfend, I mean, the whole social media pressure that we teenage boys and girls must be under. Yeah. I don't think anybody knows the scale of that yet, because you could do daft things when you're a teenager and 4 or 5 people knew. Nowadays, social
everybody
media,
knows.
Everybody and has an opinion and can keep it forever. If you're a fragile human being, that's happening.
There's a gauge on your self-worth now, whereas in the past that wasn't as prevalent.
You were allowed to make mistakes without that always judging you. And I'm in politics where sometimes you have been judged for mistakes. I just say to folk, as long as I've sincere in my apology and I've learned from it, what more can you ask? Because I defy anybody to make mistakes in life.
We'll all continue to make them as well, Frank.
But the problem is the sanctimony that can exist on social media, where people can say, "I would never be me. I'd never do that." You go,
You're absolutely right, because I think what tickled me about 18 months ago is I agreed to interview Paolo Di Canio.
Yeah.
Right. And the reason I agreed to interview Paolo Di Canio is because I enjoy interviewing people.
Yeah.
Right. And I find him an intriguing individual.
Yeah.
Due to his politics,
a very complicated
football,
personality,
and the strange dichotomy between his politics and what he did on a football park when he wasn't making hand salutes and gestures, etc. And the stick I took for having the audacity to agree to interview Paolo Di Canio, and then what I get is people giving me the old, anti-fascist thing.
Yeah.
And these same people, in many ways, don't live their life like their Twitter profile would suggest.
No,
of course they don't.
And when I look at my political makeup in the tapestry of my youth, and I think, well, you don't really have a right to question whether or not I want to interview someone who is a self-proclaimed fascist, and that's what I wanted to talk to him about.
Yeah. Well, there's that wonderful exchange, I think, that Obama was being interviewed, and he talked about it was happening in modern politics, is that if you're woke, that you're self-righteous about you've understood more than anybody else. And when Obama was saying, actually, you spend time trying to work out why people have arrived at their opinions. Because obviously Obama was a kind of mercurial politician, given his background and how he emerged and so on. But he was saying, it's righteousness. I mean, that's right through history. If you look at the history of this nation, the big divisions, and when religion was central to people's lives, so the whole divisions in the times of the killing years between Episcopalianism and Presbyterianism, never mind the transition of Scotland from essentially a Catholic nation in terms of worship to a Presbyterian nation. But even within all those, the people were so profoundly disagreeing with each other. They were only finding common ground. They were actually just wanting to polarise it. And I think politics has been affected by that, the polarisation. But the earlier point I said, if those who are arguing for an independent Scotland, they need to win people over who weren't persuaded of it in 2014. So shouting at them and calling them yuns and abusive terms, or the nonsense that I occasionally got about the sort of Tory Labour, this kind of stuff. You read Tories and all that, and you say to yourself, really, you don't understand anything with me. And it's an easy cliche. And I think we need to, people like yourself that are doing interviewing, you don't need to like the person you're interviewing, but you want to explore for your listeners what makes up that individual. Yeah. And let others make their judgment. If somebody wants to be righteous about it, fair dues. But don't deny you the right to try and explore it, because that really that's no freedom of speech.
No, absolutely not. But the person that's been interviewed is entitled to his or her opinion, and they're entitled to vote or support whatever team they want. And that's what's great about this country.
Yeah.
Speak openly. If you want to speak about something, speak about it.
Yeah.
And that's why somebody like yourself, Frank, that we welcome onto the show to speak openly and speak about your love for Celtic, your love for music, your love for politics, but most importantly, your love for life.
Yeah.
And that's very, very important.
Yeah.
And I think the more that's said, the better. I don't think it's right that because somebody says that we've got to do a specific thing, that we all go and do it. Like, we've got to raise our hand for something, or we've got to kneel for something, or whatever. You do it because you want to do it. You support who you want to support. Mm-hmm. You don't go and do it because the guy down the road tells you to do it. You feel right and you feel comfortable from within yourself in making your decisions in politics, in sport, in life in general.
Yeah.
That's what I think. Yeah. And that's my personal opinion, Frank.
Yeah.
And we look at it, and if we go back, Frank, we look at it being at school. Did you ever think that you would become the leader of Glasgow District Council? I don't know. Did I ever think that I would be mixing and rubbing shoulders with politicians, with sports people, with ordinary people on the street, with millionaires, with billionaires? Did I ever think back then I would be running up to a 30, 50 million pound company? Probably the answer's no. But we've learned as we go to be able to adjust ourselves to whatever situation we find ourselves in, to speak the way that we want to speak today is not necessarily the way we spoke yesterday.
Yeah.
And we learn from yesterday and we learn from today to be more knowledgeable for tomorrow.
Yeah. But the critical thing, Jim, is how roundabout is unconsciously we've been assisted and shaped by people who had essentially good values. And, obviously I'm in the age now where, older relatives are passing on. Tragically I lost my twin sister and I lost my mother. And you reflect on that.
Of course you do.
Within a couple of months each other and you go, but what shaped them in terms of their values? And you say to yourself, well, that unconsciously that's about how you create, the opportunity. In a sense, if my sort of guidance teacher said to me, you'll be having the chance to be running the Glasgow City Council 2 different generations apart, which I never thought would have happened, and you've got a chance to be a Minister of State in the Scottish Government. I wasn't, my first political experience, I couldn't vote in it, was the 1979 referendum for the East Scottish Assembly, as they called it in those days. I've spent all my adult life involved in Labour, making sure that Labour had a very strong commitment to the idea of a Scottish Parliament, Home Rule for Scotland. Well, there's now a big challenge about what's the best way to reflect that. But at the end of the day, powers should reside at a local level. Now, the big challenge for the Scottish Government is how do they, because I'm a believer in the local, how do we get powers down to local authorities and councils, empower them to try and work with the communities that they serve. But underpinning it was the sense of values. And it never, and there's that old line to your Glasgow relatives, never forget where you came from.
Absolutely. And Paul spoke earlier as well about the values of his father and his mother, the free dinner tickets. I had the free dinner tickets, and as I've said, and I don't mind saying, how I was brought up. If it wasn't for the St Vincent de Paul at times and the Main Stess at times, and obviously the famous Provi check, we had something. We had something special that had certain values in life. And as I said, it was an education that we didn't know about that we were actually getting at the time. Yeah. And what we didn't realise as well at that particular time, when our parents who came across, our forefathers came across the island and whatever it may be, mine was Italy and so on, and I don't know your own background there, Frank, or whatever it may be, but what they installed in their kids, and then who became our parents, they said, you can be whatever you want to be. And when we were younger, we used to look, Paul, and say, I don't really get that. But now that we're a wee bit older and hopefully a wee bit wiser, now we understand what they taught us. They taught us all the good things that could happen if we became good people with a conscience that said, do the best that you can do. Yeah.
Well, when I was a teacher and for a good number of years before I went into full-time politics, the postal districts that I cover were like G33 and so on. So the kids would always get to the Easter House area and they would go, are we getting a chance? We put down G33 on my application. I said, let's accept there's people going to judge you. So that's why you need to work twice as hard to demonstrate that you've got that. But ultimately, all the kids that I taught that did well is because they had love running about them. They had somebody that believed them and believed in them in the house. Whether that was a mammy left on their own with the Waynes or whether it was just a wider family, that gave them a sense of security. School properly done should give them a double sense of security. And if you've got a wee bit of luck upstairs in terms of either emotional intelligence or just innate intelligence in terms of understanding complex issues, there's a chance for you. And one of the generational things that I benefited from was, the chance that you could think about, well, should you go to university? And I was like, you're joking. But I took the risk and, you get the benefit out of that. And the best departments I ever taught in were folk from my background putting something back in for those kids. To
Absolutely.
Make sure that, not just that. I talked earlier in the pre-interview about a fellow we had as our PE teacher, the late John Kearney.
Yes, I remember him.
And John was just an all dyed-in-the-wool socialist.
Yep.
But what a character. And I remember we won the athletics tournaments against some of the private schools at Scotstoun, and I've never seen a man as happy.
He liked his athletics, didn't he?
He was into it, but he's saying...
You brought that memory back, yeah.
But he said, you've actually... The wee state school from the northeast of Glasgow is beating the best of private schools. So you can imagine how... And I remember coming back in the school bus that we'd hired for the event. I've never seen somebody so content. And he's passed away now, John, but he was a lovely man. And again, he was a kind of person that imbued you with values. And, you know, we should treasure them. When we don't always get that, but if there's people in our life when we were younger, adults that are prepared to do that, take as much of that. Distill as much of that into what you can do, and you can get the best opportunity.
You're right. You take it and you embrace it, and you think about it, and you say, well, I can maybe help a wee bit here, which I've personally done here.
Yeah.
We get involved with all these kids. I absolutely love it. But you know what I've liked about talking today is the politics, is the parts of the memories growing up and whatever. And now we're going to speak a wee bit, hopefully more, Paul, about the Celtic. We all look at the smiles on your faces.
How do we end up running this topic?
Because we love the Celtic, right? And it's great. And Paul, I think that's a fantastic jersey.
I've been looking over at it. Frank, you've brought in a framed set of hoops. It's the old 1970s, a quintessential 70s jersey with a floppy collar. Talk to us about some of the names on that jersey.
Well, there's two benefits to the jersey in terms of, first of all, the names are legible. There's that many.
Do you know what I liked about it, Frank? Not to jump in here, because you're a politician, obviously, and I'm no. Ali Hunter.
Yeah,
that brought right away I got it, didn't I?
Because he's one of those keepers that we sometimes forget the names of. Because, I mean, historically, you know, Celtic haven't been brilliant for keepers, you know, in terms of, like, you know, obviously there's the iconic one in terms of Ronnie Simpson, and then in latter years the likes of the rather colourful Arthur Boric and obviously the recent season and a half we had with Fraser Foster. But the quality of the players that's on there,
it's unbelievable. It's great.
You've got Dalglish, Jimmy Johnson, Billy M'Neill, and it's just probably, it looks like a mid
Jim Brogan.
It looks like the 74-ish team by the look of things, if you look back in memory. But it's a fantastic, I mean, I acquired it. I've always wanted to think, could you get away with putting it up in your office? And I always tended to be cautious.
Oh, come on, why did you not put it up in your office?
I know where you're going to go. That means you can't be a real Celtic man if you know.
Get it up and fly the flag, man.
Exactly. But at the end of the day, it's just, you know, I was probably 12 when that team was put together, and it was the kind of fag end of the Steen years, probably. God bless him in terms of contribution he made, but you know, the accident obviously impacted. But it's a fantastic jersey, and as I said, virtually all the names, they're all players.
Stephen Murray.
Yeah.
As well. And Paul, we bit for Paul as well here. Paul is just about to complete the Celtic Jerseys book,
yes,
which is a history of the Celtic jersey through the years,
right?
Which is fantastic. And he's actually got me thinking about all different jerseys as well. But as soon as I seen that jersey, I went, I love it. I love that green and white jersey anyway, but that's a cracker.
The reason jerseys are great is there's no advertising.
That's that.
You know,
no badge, no advertising.
You know, they're repeating on the kind of Twitter quite a lot of the ITV sports programmes from the early 70s and so on, and all these wonderful English, you know, English League first division is then was, but the equivalent to Premiership, and they're just beautiful designs, you know, and you think, you know, and you look at that, and then you look at the other strips, and then you look at the modern age because they need to get money. It's just, you know, why we have, I know why we're advertising, it's because we need to generate income for the clubs, but
it's a great jersey.
There's something about these unblemished, you know,
unadulterated. But the green and white hoops will take us on to some of your finest memories as a Celtic fan. Before I ask you them, Frank, what's your finest memories as the sports minister? Some of the highlights.
Well, well, if you could invent a job at a ministerial level that is pressure-ridden but still very enjoyable, you know, you couldn't put a portfolio together. I remember saying to Jack McConnell, it wasn't for me, it had already been created, tourism, culture and sport. you know. So you get a chance to be in the Shetlands and in the Orkneys and the Western Isles for your job, you know. And these are beautiful places in Scotland that a vast majority of Scots probably hadn't even been in. So that was great. The culture's obviously, you've got the, you know, everything in culture, you know, which in terms of entertainment and so on. And then sport. So one of the great privileges is that we were over in Barcelona. Jim Wallace was the Deputy First Minister. And I still got the picture, but I won't reveal it until necessary. But Jim absolutely enjoyed himself late on at night with a bottle of, I'm not a drinker but at all, but Highland Park. And he must have tanked the full bottle. And yet he was still up at 6:30 the next morning to get ready for a breakfast dinner with industrialists and from Catalonia. But we didn't know about 3:30 in the morning. I see a Jimmy hat on him. So there's this brilliant photograph that I've got of Jim Wallace, the then Deputy First Minister, totally sozzled at 3 in the morning with a hat on. But one of the great privileges was to be in Camp Nou with the then president of the club. I think it was Juan Laporta.
Aye.
So, and then you got a chance to meet Cruyff ran this academy, interestingly, the kind of things. But I think he did a particular academy for kids with partial disability. So it was a kind of sports academy around, no special needs, that's the wrong phrase, but youngsters that might have had some difficulty, or young people. Yeah. And you got a chance to talk to him in the stadium and all that, and I've been interviewed by the Daily Record, and I had a wee chat with him about that fantastic scene of the 74 World Cup where he does the drag back. I know you call it the drag back, you know what I'm talking about, where Cruyff turns.
The Cruyff turn.
The Cruyff turn. And I just said to him, that's all right for you in the plush grass of the Netherlands. I said, you try that on Glenconner Park and see what happens to you.
Black
you know?
ash.
And I don't think, obviously I know that you needed it translated quite powerfully, but, you know, but to talk to a legend like that, you know, and what I liked about him was he was just chatting about football to me. And he talked about how, and it is true when you think about your own time as a youngster when you were playing football and the players that were much better than you, is that it's the spatial awareness, he called.
And
the idea is that you know from the side and you've got something in your sight of vision that makes you that player. Obviously, he was one of the greatest ever footballers of all time, but it was interesting how he talked about that, and he said everybody's got it. Young kids have got it at school, so we need to help develop that. And obviously, because he was working with youngsters that had perhaps particular needs, how to maximise that. And he just had a wee team in them, and obviously the Barcelona model, it was basically the Dutch. The way in which Barcelona even play today is modelled on the Dutch masters that round Ajax of the early 70s, and the whole idea of the framing, stuff that you can't do yourself really because you're not good enough, like the diagonal passing and then winning the ball back and making sure.
I was having a discussion about that with a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, and that's what he said. He's got a great big admiration for the way Barcelona he actually played in the systems of football. But sorry, I digress away from what I want to ask you. Now, on the pre-interview, did I hear from you, Frank, that you had a wee keepy up competition? Aye,
well, one of the laughs was I was saying, my keepy ups, if I got to 10, I was doing well, you know, because I'm wearing these big clunky boots. But the benefit is I said to him, I'll show you some of my skills here, you know, and he just started laughing because he could do it with his eyes shut. Just so the idea I could say when I'm in my dotage and hopefully in a relatively safe and secure care home when I'm older, I can say, you know, I remember the time I was playing keep up with Johan Cruyff. But I'm getting that old, I need to explain to young people who Johan Cruyff was. That's how sad it is. But even as I'm sitting here, there's a very, very well-known Scottish winger right in the middle of the picture, and then Johan Cruyff shaking hands. So that's a wonderful picture.
That's Jinky and Johan Cruyff. That's a Barfield.
So what a gentleman he was, and he still smoking cigarettes even in those days.
He took for a while. He tried to get off them by sucking lollipops. Remember that? When he was a manager.
That's right, Paul.
And when you think back, then obviously Cruyff came up against the famous green and white hoops himself with that great Ajax side in the 1970s. He came back in the 1980s as an older player, more experienced. And some of your memories, Frank, first of all, the memorable first season under Billy McNeill.
Well, I mean, obviously Billy had, you know, served Celtic immensely well, a fantastic icon in the club. Was doing well at Aberdeen. Celtic got him back, And it was kind of an uneven side, you know. Obviously, I'm probably about 16 at the time, so you're starting to go a bit more games. You know, maybe not playing as much in yourself in terms of amateur teams. And it was that long winter. There was a really, really long winter over the 78 into 79, and there were so many games to make up. And then there was just this momentum that developed, and it culminated in obviously the big match at Celtic Park, which was the night. The next day was going to be my economics higher. And I'd say to all my pals, can I go? You know, I've got to study, my teacher will kill me here. But you know what it's like, you know, your pals are champing the door, come on, let's go, and we can win the league tonight and all that, you know, okay, let's go over. And so you're in the old jungle, you know, which is obviously a palatial environment, as you know. And I can still recollect it. I think, you know, the way the trajectory of the game was, I think Rangers got up 1-up, I may be wrong. Maybe Johnny Doyle was sent off,
yep.
You know, we don't really know quite what happened. And then I think got it back, and Rangers only needed a draw that night. And then Celtic scored, but I still recollect quite vividly some guy trying to relieve himself inside one of the tenants' cans just at the time when Celtic scored, and I can still see his face. I knew the wave from the back of the jungle was coming in his direction. God knows if he survived into being able to produce children in the future, but that poor soul has probably seen his life literally flashing in front of him. And you know, it was a great, you know, obviously it was a fantastic achievement to win the league in such circumstances. And the next day, economics teachers trying to talk to me about, you know, how do you feel for the exam. I had no voice, because you've been singing all the way back up.
It's a great night, wasn't it?
It was a great game as well, because I mean, it was a rollicking match, you know, it had everything, you know. I mean, although we never get the benefit of it being fully and properly recorded, because of whatever
as they never
at the time, But the bottom line is, there's a game of football that went backwards and forwards, and then obviously not the clinching goal. The clinching goal was the own goal. I think it was Colin Jackson that conceded that own goal. Was clearly the thundershot by, I think, Murdo McLeod. But that was, I mean, you look back at that quality of that side, you know, there's players that were workmanlike, but there were some fantastic players in that side, you know what I mean? Like, Murdo McLeod had a great time. David Provan was starting to do. And then the player, I mean, we mention him a lot as Celtic fans, but we don't fully appreciate him enough, I don't think, how brilliant Danny McGrain was as a player. And as a gentleman, he's the loveliest man you could ever hope to meet. And quite humble, given his abilities.
Funny.
Incredible humble. He's got a great dry sense of humour.
Funny.
That's right. But what a player. Yeah. You know, he's a joy. It was a privilege to have had the chance to have watched him. So that was probably, you know, the most important game growing up. I mean, I remember getting taken by my father to the 69 Cup final against St Johnstone.
Yep.
And I think Bertie Hall scored in the second minute, and I always tell Bertie that's when I bumped into him. I never saw the game because my dad was still in the pub, right? And I'm going to get started. We got another half in, you know. So I was only about 7 at the time, all excited about going to a big cup final, and I didn't even get to see the goal. And Bertie says, "All right, we won the cup." But no, but that was probably the biggest kind of match that as a teenager. You know, obviously there were other momentous moments later in the 80s, but certainly that time. And I think Billy did exceptionally well, because at the beginning of that season, it didn't look like that team could win the league. You know, they just got any momentum. Sometimes in football, you just get a wee momentum with the team.
Definitely.
A wee bit of luck, and then, good.
You mentioned the long winter, and actually what happened was Celtic benefited to a degree because Danny McGrain had been out injured with a really bad injury, and he came in for the latter part of the campaign, and Danny McGrain started a move at Love Street some 7 years later. Is that a game you managed to get to as well?
Well, again, it's kind of, it just shows you how the kind of luck kicks in, you know. I mean, I was actually shopping in the bars, in the record stall in the bars, and I bumped into couple of boys I knew, and they were making their way towards the station. I said, "Where are you going?" He goes, "I'm going to the game." I said, "I've not got a ticket." And I went, "Just come." So we managed to find our way onto the train rather without any ticket. You know, in those days you could manage that. But if there's enough of you getting through the barrier at the same time, you know, right? Also, there's no problem. But even getting into Love Street and the other turnstile. So I managed to get to the game free of charge, into the game free of charge, and then, if anybody remembers the footage, in those days, nobody had all the new technology we've got. It was like, I can't remember, I don't always know the geography of the old the stadium or the terraces, but one wee guy must have had a radio, and it was like a Mexican wave. You can
right
actually
through
see
the
it,
whole stadium.
because I think Celtic keeper's about to kick the ball up the pitch. I presume it's Bonner, from memory, am I wrong?
I think it was actually St
No, it
Mirren.
was St Mirren.
It was a St
Frank,
Mirren
it was a St
goalie.
Mirren goalie.
Sorry, it was someone, and then you could just see the
You
whole
got a fright.
stadium. And everybody, because obviously the news had filtered through.
Aye.
And the funny thing about that story is, when I was in the Parliament, obviously a lot of the staff that worked in the security and the mechanism, they're great guys and girls, and I used to love telling that story about how we managed to snatch the title for the Hearts and that, and they're all jambos. I always tell it to Lord Fuchs as well, who's a big jambo. I said, I told you at my time going through to that game at Love Street, and you can see
They're still hurting.
George is still sore,
They're
you know.
still-
But but even that move, Danny in the twilight of his career, brilliant, wonderful. And then, obviously there was, I played football with Maurice Johnson, funnily enough. Who would have thought what would have happened years later? But it was just, there were a lot of good players on that side. You forget, McClare's, Johnson. Johnson was a good player, irrespective of what happens, and other people.
Absolutely.
But fantastic. A grafter, works hard. And then you had obviously McGrane, and then you had McStay,
Aye.
McLeod. And it was a good side.
And that amazing lime green away strip as well.
Do you like that one?
I loved that.
Did you? No, I was never fond of it. Because there was some, you'll know this better than I will, but Celtic had some corkers, didn't they?
They have. But you know something, Paul? Frank?
Yeah.
I can't remember any other game other than that St Mirren game, and just in my brain, that we played in that line.
And actually performed with that.
Sporting Lisbon.
Did we?
The 5-0 game. The Sporting Lisbon game. I know it was a few years before, but we did wear the lime green strip against Sporting Lisbon.
What I mean is, Paul, is in my mind, it's only the St Mirren game.
That is the iconic memory of that jersey, without a doubt.
I mean, I was at the games or that full season, home and away. I can't remember that lime green strip at all.
On one of the charity games I played in when I was in the parliamentary football team, Albert Kidd was in. It was the boy that scored the goal.
Hero.
Yeah. I mean, he did nutmeg me 2 or 3 times in that game. I was so happy.
Didn't matter, did I?
It didn't matter. On you
So
go.
you've done keep you up his way, Cruyff. You've been nutmegged by Albert Kidd.
And the thing is, one of the boys that were talking to earlier, he was obviously at school with me, and he was a school team captain. He knows how limited I was as a football player. That's why I was a goalkeeper, But but it's a great. But these are the kind of side things that, because you're involved in politics, and these were all charity events, and that was good because we were raising money for things. But who'd have thought you could be on the same football pitch? I mean, obviously Albert's kind of, he's revered because of the result. But to have played football in the same, pitch with great football players, there's nothing.
But for a man who helped make history as well, Paul would be like to him, Albert, do you have your reverse nutmegging me, will you? Because I just want to say that you've nutmegged me.
Exactly.
But that's great, isn't it?
But one of the parliamentary teams, one of the privileges we got was we were managed for a tournament between the home nations, and our manager was Kenny Dalglish.
Aye.
And I will always treasure Kenny saying to me, I've never quite seen a player like you. Because you're, and then I better not repeat it. I said, Kenny, can I get the first few
Stop
words?
There. Don't go any further, Kenny. Don't need to say any more.
Frank, you're quite good at winning tackles, but just got to pass the ball to somebody that can run. And I said, well, Kenny, I think you're not a bad football player. I better take that judgment, No, but that was a great, I mean, the whole experience of that, because I don't think anybody held out hope that day. Totally. I mean, anybody say they're turning up there thinking we can do it.
No.
Most of us were going, it's capable. I mean, technically it's capable of being done, as we proved. But, in the manner of it, fantastic, because they would get out the traps that day. It was quite an exhilarating performance right from the get-go. So the players were up for it, I was quite pleased. Davy Hay, the manager then?
It was. That was his only league title.
Davy had a hard time as manager over the years.
Of course he did, aye.
But again, a decent man.
Lovely man. Lovely
yeah,
man.
Yeah.
He came in here and Paul, again, wrote the Quality Street book as well.
Oh, great.
And Davey came in and signed it for all the young players in here along with Paul, which is great. A lovely man. Absolutely. A gem. Absolutely. What a player.
Great player. I mean, again, I only saw the tail end before he's moved to Chelsea. But it's a bit like the difficult issue that Celtic fans had in recent years, in terms of the Rodgers stuff, and it is a divisive issue among Celtic fans, and my strong view is he was asked to do a job, he did a job to the best of his ability. So, I mean, the manner of the going was difficult But, 7 trophies out of 7, and hopefully in time goes on. It's a bit like I've always regretted that day when Celtic fans had a wee go at Fergus McCann. Now, he was a Carnaptious wee so-and-so, but without him, all the things that matter to all of us. I know that's a controversial point I'm throwing out here, right?
No.
But I actually think, he did what he needed to do to help the club in its most difficult circumstances. And remember when Celtic had to recruit Brendan Rodgers, where we were after, it was the Cup semi, after we'd lost the Cup semi against the Rangers.
Yes.
And Rangers understandably were saying, we're on our way back. And I think...
But they were in for a shock, weren't they?
Well, I think he's proven himself. I mean, obviously the last few games he didn't fulfil everything for Leicester, but I'm hoping as time goes on, people are a bit more gracious about Brendan. I know it's a difficult one because I know when I'm talking to my pals that it can provoke. It's nearly as divisive as the referendum issue, if I'm honest. We're having a great night until you started.
Do not mention Brendan Rodgers or Scottish independence.
No, we'll move forward.
These two topics are no for discussion.
Paul, can you move on from those two topics?
It used to be religion and politics, but now it's Brendan Rodgers and politics.
Good Lord above.
But I've mellowed as the years have gone on. I'm a bit more, maybe because I had to be involved in politics where you're constantly having to, reconcile sometimes difficult issues, and sometimes the options in front of you, both are not great. You've got to make a decision. And I think that's true because, running a football team, particularly of the historic importance of Celtic, is the emotional attachment that people who support the club have, and then creating the space. In the same way that when Rodgers moved on, I was a wee bit uncertain about Neil. And I know that Neil's a different type of personality from who he was, as I can tell, the first time round. And I think he did really well to stabilise. And we should be thankful for that. Obviously, this is the most important season for anybody that's Celtic minded. It is really important. And, I think we've got a couple of acquisitions in the last 24 hours, I hope. So I think they just need to keep their head. But I tell you, every game will be a roller coaster. And we are what Celtic fans are their own worst enemies because sometimes they can convey that emotional uncertainty at times with their reactions on the terraces, and I just hope that people, just keep the heat. It's a long season. Look where we were in end of December last season.
Yep.
Look where we were at the end of January.
Definitely.
And that's mental discipline that happens in football, and sometimes you've been through the games. You've got a group of players that can do that, and it's a real challenge. But I think this season they cannot afford to be as lackadaisical as they were last season.
If they get their heart intelligence working together with their intellectual intelligence, and they get the both of them working and going forward with it, I think we'll be fine. I think coming through the heart with the different people that's involved and know what it means, and getting the intelligence on the part, the intelligent play. The working together, the togetherness as a club like we've never been before. If we all pull together and be one, we'll get there.
They've got to have a discipline early stages, I think, to create that confidence.
Yes.
I mean, in terms of quality of players, I still think it's a vastly superior pool. But the challenge is sometimes football's a incredible leveller. So you really need to stop those spaces. And there's too many times I thought last season where the team were uneven and didn't finish enough of a game and dropped unnecessary points, and allowed a wee bit of hope to come in. Because I can only see Rangers being the key challengers this year, and they've improved in the last couple of years, undoubtedly. There's a better quality of pool that Gerrard's put together. But Celtic need, I mean, don't get me wrong, amongst anybody that's a Celtic supporter, there's going to be a level of intensity. I don't think we've ever experienced that, other than the stopping
the 10. Yeah,
and that was intense. That was the most emotional 90 minutes of my life. I wasn't even at the game. I was at a garden centre.
I was at the game. It was brilliant. It was brilliant.
I was just pacing up and down, But and that's what football does to you, because sometimes, and when it's done, you go, just move on. Yet for that period of that 90 minutes or that week, it's like everything, and then you go, why am I getting, when the world's as turmoil as it is and people are struggling as they are, I think, why am I letting myself? And then it's because it's sport and it's football and it's emotion, and that's what matters, it keeps you going.
Emotion and passion.
You've not come across the day as being too political, too much of the politician you've come across the deities, which is good, as being a man that wants to come in and talk about his club, talk a wee bit about the music, the nice caricature, putting that on the desk, playing the guitar is brilliant.
4 chords only though.
The same as myself. And I think I'm merry a poet today than I was back at All Saints, but that's another story. It's actually an honour to have a leader of this great city, Glasgow, sitting in my presence in a historical place, the second Hampden, that then became the home of Carkin Park. It's now the home of Jimmy Johnson, where a lot of charitable work is done, Frank. Hopefully, what you see here, you'll go out and spread the news a wee bit about what you've seen here. But it's been really, really good. My last question is, your favourite Celtic player?
Well, I mean, I probably wouldn't get out alive if I don't say Jimmy Johnson.
No, we'll let you out. Doesn't need to be jinky.
Entertainment-wise, it's Johnson.
Yes.
Overall player, in terms of range and quality of performances and his capacity to change games, it would probably be Larsson. But the player that mattered the most to me was Danny McGrain.
We love Danny.
We love him.
All that's left for Jim and I to say, Frank, is thank you for your time and thank you for joining us on a Celtic State of Mind.
Great. It's a very different type of interview that I'm normally used to, so I appreciate you giving me the chance. And just, this club matters in the history of this city, as other clubs obviously do as well. I need to be balanced about that, but there's many more great days ahead if the club just keeps its discipline and hopefully get the enjoyment that's been part of growing up to be a Celtic supporter, and long may it continue.